everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Brenna Jean, a future doctor, and today is going to be part one of a two-part little video series here about my experience as a medical scribe. Let's get started. Wait, I wanted to give you what I was going to be talking about as a preview so that you actually watch the whole thing through. So, what I'm planning on going through in this first video is why I decided to start scribing, the process of becoming a scribe, because it is actually longer than you'd think, what my first solo shift was like, and some of my favorite things that I learned or experienced from being a scribe. Video one will start right now. Okay, so why I decided to start scribing, well, I mean, any pre-med knows that it's really important to get real life, like healthcare experience before you apply to medical school. And for me, this was extra important because I hadn't spent my whole life trying to get into medical school. I had spent most of my life trying to become a civil engineer, so a little different. So for me, scribing was that way to really verify that healthcare was something that I wanted to do and something that I could be good at and be passionate about. To start scribing was honestly, like, it was a little bit more difficult than what I thought it would be. There were a few different companies to choose from, and the company that I ultimately chose was great because they got back to me really quickly, their training schedule was very manageable, and their turnaround time wasn't really that bad. The way it worked is I submitted an application, then I got called and said, hey, we'd like to interview you and see if you would make a good fit. I went to the hospital that I ultimately ended up working at, and I did an interview, and this consisted of a few typical interview things like, why do you want to become a scribe? What experiences do you think would make you a good scribe? There, I definitely had to do a typing test. You can look these up online if you want to test yourself or practice, but it's basically like, how fast can you be typing? And then she also gave me a vocabulary test where she gave me a bunch of random, like, very complex medical words, and I had to try and spell them out the best I could, which anyone who's taken a medical terminology class or anything like that, you know how crazy those words can get. I also had to submit a resume as with any other job interview. So just make sure you have a good resume that's suited to showing off why you should be a scribe. Timeline wise, I applied in February, March of my junior year. I got the interview in March of my junior year and also accepted. And then I started my training courses in April. The training might be a bit different at different companies, but I'll tell you how it worked for me. So in order to become a scribe, I had to go through a series of classes and tests in order to be put out on the floor. So first, I had to take a series of 7 3-hour online courses. So quantity 7, each of those was 3 hours long. They were all virtual. They only appeared at certain times. I did get paid for that time, which is awesome. And throughout the course, you learned about different things. So you learned about the different parts of what some people call SOAP notes, what we call just like medical notes, but you learned the different parts of that note that you had to fill out. Chief complaint, history of present illness, physical exam, oh God, I can't even remember. Well, I guess I'll know in a few months. You also had to fill out like events that happened, any procedures, medications, stuff like that. So you learned all the basics of filling out the form. You also learned a lot of just like medical terminology. So acronyms, keywords, illnesses, what symptoms typically led to which illnesses or diagnoses, so that you could be preparing or anticipating what your physician was going to say for common things that you saw in your day-to-day practice. So for me, I was placed in an ER, so an emergency room. So I was presented with a lot of illnesses or diagnoses that you typically see in an emergency room. That way I was familiar with those once I started getting out onto the floor. In order to continue to the training phase, you had to pass a very long exam that included all of the medical terminology that you were learning, the acronyms, and then a few basics to make sure you knew how to fill out the notes and that you knew some of the intricacies of the electronic medical record system that we were using. Luckily, I passed that exam and then I moved on to 7 training shifts. And this is where I was paired with either one of our chief scribes or just another experienced scribe on a shift. I would do a majority of the actual notes and note writing, but they would check over my work before passing it off to the physician to make sure that I was doing things correctly. They would offer feedback on what I needed to change about how I recorded a certain illness or how I recorded a certain piece of the history, and just helping me learn in real time. So I was actually going into patient rooms at this time. We weren't really allowed to interact with the patients unless the patients initiated. And even then it was like,
yes, I can get you a cup of water.
Like, we couldn't do anything else really. At that point, you're like actually in the ER, you're following the physician around. So there was a lot more going on. So that's why they had the training shifts, so that you could kind of get adjusted to all of the noise of working in an ER and still make sure that you were getting the proper content down within that patient's note. Okay, my first solo shift. Crazy. Now, luckily, there were always at least 2 scribes working in the ER at any given time. So even when I was on my solo shift, I still had at least one other scribe that I could talk to, reference, and like ask advice from in case I didn't know what to do. So this was especially useful on my very first shift because we had a trauma case come in, and it was, and trauma cases in and of themselves are it's just like hectic, right? Because the physician inevitably has other patients that they're trying to care for, but if they're the on-call trauma person, then they have to drop whatever they're doing and address the trauma because it's a trauma case. Like, you have to take care of that person. I'll try not to give you too many specifics because I don't want to give away any protective, like, personal information. But what I will say is this trauma case, there was lots of family in the emergency room. It was a younger adult who had gotten in an accident, and it was very overwhelming. Like, I got to watch the physician manage not only the medical situation, but also the family situation that was developing right outside the trauma room. And for me, I had to be aware of everything that was going on. I had to know exactly what ultrasound they were doing. I had to know exactly what exam findings they were reading out. I had to know exactly what they were doing and when, because every single thing I had to track in that note. And keep in mind, it's not like I was walking around with like a little table and like typing or writing. I had a little laptop that I would lean up against the wall, prop my leg up, and just like balance it on my knee. And like, or I would try and find a ledge somewhere that was hygienic to put my laptop and type all these things. So it was very on the fly. Like, you had to be very careful about where you were so you weren't getting in people's way. Yeah, it was crazy, but so helpful. Like, talk about dipping your toes in the pond, right? Like, testing out the water, so to speak. Like, that was a freaking like cannonball into the lake kind of exposure to healthcare. And every single one of my shifts, they weren't always trauma cases. They weren't always super hectic and crazy, but I always learned something new. And that was really cool. So I'm starting to get into lessons learned, but so that'll be next video. But to wrap this video up, I do want to talk about some of my favorite things from scribing. Helping people. I loved being able to see like patients come in and get their problems resolved. So even though I wasn't interacting with patients on a I'm your provider kind of way, it was still really cool to actually be in that setting and to have people come in and explain what was going on and say like, hey, we're here for you. We're going to figure it out. We're going to run these tests and we're going to solve your problem. Yeah, so that was awesome. It was also a great way to learn about the applications of medicine. At the time of when I started scribing, I had already taken a year of anatomy and physiology. So I got to see a lot of what I learned in those courses get put to the test, especially when it came to understanding labs that they were running or visualizations like CT scans and MRIs. It was great because physicians, like, if we had to do a CT scan, right, they would pull it up and they would say, like, okay, do you see this? This is the liver. And like, do you see this? This is this organ. And it was really cool and informative. And I just felt like I was learning a lot. Let's pause. I'm an experiential learner, so working as a scribe was freaking awesome. And honestly, it makes me so excited for rotations because as great as didactic learning is, I learn best by just doing things. So once I get into rotations and I start actually applying the things that I've learned,
Oh my gosh, it's gonna be amazing.
I loved the constant flurry of things to do. I am someone who thrives on being at like 90 to 96% capacity. And when you're in the ER, even as a scribe, you always have something to do. You always have a patient to go see with your provider, a lab to go check on, or you always have something that you can update in your patient notes to make sure that things are coded properly, that they're gonna go to billing properly, that the patient got all the information that they needed. So there's always something going on. And to me, being at that level of capacity throughout my whole shift was great. I loved it. My last favorite thing is, especially working in an ER, I liked people getting hurt. Let's be very clear about this. I do not like when people get hurt or when they're concerned about their health, but especially with trauma cases, those were just really cool to see. I don't know, it was just a really eye-opening experience for me, and those were definitely some of my favorite shifts when we had trauma cases because you're inundated with so much information and you learn so much. That is all I'm going to talk about in today's video. Definitely stay tuned for next week's video as a follow-up to today about things I learned while I was scribing, what a typical shift looked like for me, and then of course why I stopped scribing. That is equally as important. Yeah, that's all I have for today. If you liked what you saw today, please like this video and subscribe to see more just like this. And if you're not already, please follow me on my Instagram at BrennaJFutureDoc. And I'd love to connect with you on there if you have any ideas for things that you'd like to see from me, or if you just need any pre-med advice. I'm here for you no matter what. So yeah, that's it. Have a good one, and I'll see you next time. Bye!